The planet Xalanthos, once a beacon of hope and prosperity, now lay on the brink of destruction. For years, it had been under the unrelenting siege of the Xalriths, a ruthless and cold-blooded species known for their superior technology and merciless tactics. The planet's once vibrant cities filled with life and culture now stood as hollow echoes of a forgotten time, crumbling beneath the weight of constant bombardment. The Xalrith fleet, an enormous force of warships, had blocked every attempt at communication, severing all trade routes and leaving Xalanthos isolated. The Trelvans, the peaceful inhabitants of the planet, had never been prepared for such a war. With no military experience and technology that was nothing compared to the advanced weaponry of the Xalriths, they were forced to fight back with sheer determination and the last remnants of their strength. Day after day, they withstood attacks, their defenses growing weaker and their hopes dimmer. The Trelvan warriors, although brave, lacked the training and firepower needed to repel the invaders. They used whatever they had, old weapons, primitive armor, and desperate tactics. But, with every battle, it became clearer that the Xalriths were too powerful to defeat. The Trelvans watched as their once thriving cities burned, as their friends and families fell in battle, and as the lights of hope in their hearts flickered out. The once lush landscapes of Xalanthos, filled with towering trees and crystal clear rivers, were now scarred and barren, ravaged by the constant war. The Trelvans' resolve, though strong, began to crack under the pressure. They fought with everything they had, but it was never enough. The Xalriths seemed to have no end to their forces, no limit to their cruelty. It was a war that seemed destined to be lost. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the people of Xalanthos began to accept the inevitable. The last hope for survival seemed to slip further and further away. The Trelvan leaders, desperate to save their people, gathered in a council meeting that would define the planet's fate. They discussed the possibility of surrender, but the thought was unbearable. They had no intention of bowing to the Xalriths, but they saw no other option. It was in this dark hour that they made one last attempt to reach out, one final plea to the stars, to any race or force that might come to their aid. The Trelvans sent a desperate message, broadcasted through every available channel, hoping that somehow, somewhere, someone would hear them. It was a cry for help, filled with desperation, fear, and the last remnants of hope. But deep down, they were certain that no one would come. Their enemies were too powerful, their cries too small to be heard in the vast emptiness of space. The Trelvans had been abandoned by the galaxy. The war had raged for too long, and they were alone. No reinforcements were coming. No rescue was on its way. The planet was condemned to fall, and with it, the Trelvan race would be lost. The leaders, now resigned to their fate, could only watch as the sky above Xalanthos darkened. The lights of the Xalrith fleet hovered ominously in orbit, their weapons aimed at the planet's heart. The Trelvans gathered what little strength they had left, preparing for the final stand. The fight, they knew, would be their last. They could only hope that, in the end, their sacrifice might inspire some future resistance, if anyone was left, to hear their story. But as the Xalrith ships closed in, there was no sign of salvation. No ships in the distance, no glimmer of hope in the void. All seemed lost. The cries of the Trelvans faded into the emptiness of space, swallowed by the oppressive silence. As the Trelvans prepared themselves for what seemed like their final battle, something unexpected occurred, something that sent a ripple of disbelief through their battered ranks. The planet's communication systems, which had been failing for months, flickered to life. At first, the Trelvans thought it was a malfunction, another cruel trick by the Xalriths. Perhaps a message planted in their systems to sow confusion, or a last-minute taunt before the final assault. But as the transmission became clearer, there was no mistaking it. The message was direct, simple, and almost too unreal to comprehend. Help is on the way. The Trelvan Council, which had gathered in the remnants of their once grand hall, was struck into stunned silence. They exchanged uncertain looks, unsure whether to trust what they were hearing. Their planet had been under siege for years. Every attempt at reaching out for assistance had failed. All they had now was the fading hope that somehow someone might hear their cries. But this felt different. This was not a plea from a familiar ally or an anonymous signal from a nearby fleet. No, this was something else entirely. The message had no origin they could trace. There were no markings, no recognizable signals, no sign of any known species. It was just a voice saying, "Help is on the way." The Trelvans had heard rumors of a species, humans, who were said to be both terrifying and unstoppable in battle. Stories whispered by long-lost traders who claimed they had encountered them in the darkest corners of space. Humans were supposed to be relentless, fierce, and unlike any other race the galaxy had ever seen. But those were just stories. The Trelvans had never had any reason to believe they were real. After all, how could such a myth be true? Yet, in the silence that followed the message, one of the council members, the youngest and most hopeful, dared to speak the words that everyone had been thinking. Could it be them? Could the humans be coming? The room fell silent once more as the weight of his words settled over them. The council had spent years fighting alone, and now, in their darkest hour, there was a flicker of something they hadn't dared hope for, in a long time, a chance. But what were the chances? The ship, whoever they were, was still far away. Would they make it in time? The Trelvans had never seen such a ship, never even imagined what kind of power it would take to cross the vast stretches of space and come to their aid. Before the council could debate further, something else happened, something that made their hearts skip a beat. The distant sky above Xalanthos, which had been eerily still for days, began to shimmer. A faint disturbance in the air, like the quiet crackle of static, spread across the planet. Then, the ground trembled slightly, just enough for the Trelvans to feel it through their feet. It was not an earthquake, nor a tremor from a weapon. No, this was different. It was deep, like the rumble of something immense, something powerful, moving through the void of space. The people of Xalanthos looked, up, confusion and wonder filling their eyes. The skies, which had been a dull gray for so long, began to shift, as if a storm were rolling in. But this was no ordinary storm. This was something far beyond the natural world. A deafening roar, a sound unlike anything the Trelvans had ever heard, reverberated through the planet. It felt like the air itself was trembling with anticipation. And then, as the tremors grew stronger, the source of the sound revealed itself. From the vast emptiness of space, a shape began to emerge. It was enormous, so large that it seemed to fill the sky itself. The Trelvans' eyes widened as they saw it for the first time. A ship, far beyond the size or capability of any vessel they had ever encountered. It wasn't like the sleek and intimidating ships of the Zalriths, nor was it like anything from their own world. It was something otherworldly, forged from a dark, unrecognizable metal that seemed to absorb the very light around it. The ship's engines roared and the rumbling intensified, shaking the ground beneath their feet as it descended. The Zalrith fleet, hovering above the planet, had not noticed the new arrival at first, too busy preparing for the final assault. But now, as the giant ship drew closer, the enemy ships began to shift, their weapons targeting the new threat. They had no idea what they were facing. The Trelvans, still in shock, watched in awe as the ship loomed closer. Who were these strangers? Was this truly the help they had been promised? Or had they simply witnessed the arrival of something even more dangerous than the Zalriths themselves? One thing was clear, the fight for Xalanthos had just taken a new turn. In the black void above Xalanthos, something massive began to materialize, an object so large it seemed to eclipse the stars themselves. The Trelvans, still stunned by the mysterious signal and the tremors that had shaken their world, now stared up in disbelief. What they were witnessing was unlike anything they had ever imagined. A colossal warship, dark as the depths of space, seemed to tear through the emptiness. With an eerie shriek, the sound was piercing, unsettling, like the howl of some great beast emerging from the abyss. It echoed for miles, vibrating through the very atmosphere of Xalanthos, sending chills down the spines of all who heard it. This was no ordinary ship. This was something far beyond the reach of anything the Trelvans had ever encountered, a vessel born of pure power and mystery. The Trelvans' hearts pounded in their chests as the ship descended, its immense size slowly revealing itself against the backdrop of the distant stars. Its hull shimmered with an unnatural glow, an energy that seemed to pulse and breathe, as if the ship itself was alive. The glow intensified, flickering like flames on the edge of a fire, casting an eerie light over the planet's surface. It was a presence, something that demanded attention, a force so potent that the very air seemed to crackle with anticipation. The Trelvans watched, wide-eyed, as the warship cut through the void with unnerving precision, its speed unmatchable by anything in their own arsenal. Above, in the cold expanse, the Zalrith fleet, which had been poised to destroy Xalanthos, now shifted nervously. They had been preparing for the final strike, the annihilation of the Trelvan homeworld, but as they looked up, they saw the same thing the Trelvans saw, and they froze. A ship, larger and more powerful than anything they had ever encountered, was descending upon them. It was too late to escape, too late to retreat. The Zalrith fleet had no choice but to respond. The Zalriths fired first. Their warships launched volleys of missiles, their engines lighting up as they filled the sky with deadly firepower. It was their usual tactic: overwhelm the target with brute force, break them down until they were nothing but ash. But as the missiles streaked toward the human warship, something incredible happened. The Valor's Fury, as the ship was called, didn't even flinch. It didn't dodge or evade. It simply absorbed the incoming fire with an almost casual indifference. The blasts collided with the warship's shimmering hull, and instead of exploding, they were absorbed, vanishing as though the ship had swallowed them whole. The Zalriths had never seen anything like this before. Their weapons, no matter how powerful, were useless against the dark, impenetrable surface of the human ship. The Valor's Fury didn't wait. It didn't need to. With a sudden burst of energy, it retaliated. From its belly, a series of bright, piercing beams of light shot out, streaking across the heavens. The Zalrith ships, some of the most formidable in the galaxy, were caught off guard. The beams hit with pinpoint accuracy, cutting through their shields and tearing their warships apart like paper. In mere moments, several of the Zalrith ships exploded into violent balls of fire and debris. The Zalriths, for the first time in years, found themselves on the back foot. The Trelvans, who had been preparing for their final stand, now watched in awe. Their enemies, the ones who had reduced their cities to ruins, were now the ones fleeing in terror. The Zalrith fleet, in disarray, began to retreat, but it was too late. The Valor's Fury moved through the battlefield with terrifying grace, its cannons firing relentlessly, sending ship after ship spiraling into the blackness of space. The sound of the battle, the roar of engines, the crackle of energy blasts, filled the air like the soundtrack of some apocalyptic war. For the Trelvans, the arrival of this ship was nothing short of miraculous. The war, which had seemed lost, had taken an unimaginable turn. The human warship, Valor's Fury, was a force of nature, a weapon of destruction unlike any they had ever dreamed of. And as they watched the Zalrith fleet disintegrate before their eyes, they realized one undeniable truth: help had truly arrived. The galaxy had just witnessed the terrifying power of humanity, and nothing would be the same again. The battle raged on, but for the first time in years, the Trelvans held their heads high. They were not alone. And with the humans fighting by their side, they knew that they had a chance, perhaps even to win. The battle above Xalanthos erupted with a ferocity unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Zalriths, confident in their overwhelming firepower, braced themselves for the final assault. Their warships, sleek and armed to the teeth, began to charge up their weapons, eager to wipe the Trelvans off the map. But the Valor's fury was not intimidated. From its massive cannons, a single salvo erupted, and the shockwaves it sent through space were felt by everyone. The energy from the blast was so intense that it rattled the very fabric of the galaxy, and the first few Zalrith ships, some of the most advanced in their fleet, were obliterated in an instant. The destruction was swift, brutal, and complete. The Zalriths had no time to react. One moment they were poised for victory, and the next, their forces were crumbling. The remaining Zalrith ships scrambled to regroup, their once proud fleet now in disarray. But there was no order in their retreat, no calculated strategy. They were scattered and panicked, desperately trying to flee from the human warship that had shattered their fleet with ease. The Valor's fury didn't chase after them. It didn't need to. Instead, it hovered, watching from above like a predator watching its prey. Its cannons fired again and again, each shot tearing through the void with terrifying precision, making sure there was no chance for the Zalriths to recover. On the surface of Xalanthos, the Trelvans watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the scale of what was happening above them. For so long, they had fought with everything they had, but it was never enough. Now, as they watched the Zalrith warships fall one by one, they saw something they never thought possible: victory. The humans were fighting with an intensity and strategy that was beyond anything the Trelvans had ever witnessed. Every move the human warship made was calculated, ruthless, and effective. It wasn't just the strength of their technology, it was the sheer will to win, the unbreakable spirit that drove them forward. The Zalriths, who had once seemed invincible, were now nothing more than prey, helpless against the unrelenting force of humanity. As the battle raged in space, the Trelvans on the ground found themselves filled with a renewed sense of hope. Inspired by the bravery of the humans, the Trelvan soldiers began to rally. Where once they had been hesitant and fearful, now they fought with a fire they hadn't known in years. The Zalriths, who had been pushing them to the brink of extinction, suddenly found themselves outmatched on the ground as well. The Trelvans, armed with nothing but their courage and the knowledge that they were not alone, began to push back. They fought with a fierce desperation, knowing that if they didn't succeed now, they would lose everything. The tide of the battle had shifted. What had once seemed like an inevitable defeat for the Trelvans was now a struggle the Zalriths were losing. On the ground, Trelvan soldiers, emboldened by the sight of the Valor's fury above, fought harder than ever before. They used every advantage they could, every weapon, every bit of technology they had managed to salvage in the years of war. But it wasn't just technology that helped them now. It was the spirit of defiance, the knowledge that they had allies, real, powerful allies, fighting alongside them. The Zalriths, with their massive fleets and superior weaponry, had underestimated the tenacity of humanity. The humans didn't rely on numbers or sheer strength alone. They fought with a kind of determination that was born from something deep within, something that made them relentless in the face of danger. The Trelvans saw that now. They saw that the humans would never give up, no matter the odds. They were willing to do whatever it took to protect the helpless, to stand firm against the darkness, even when all seemed lost. And so, with the Valor's fury above and the Trelvans fighting below, the battle for Xalanthos raged on. The war was far from over, but the balance had changed. The Trelvans had something they hadn't had in years: hope. And with that hope, they knew they could win. The Zalriths were not prepared for the human spirit, and the Trelvans would make sure they learned that lesson the hard way. The battle that had ravaged Xalanthos for days was finally drawing to a close. The sky above, once filled with the roars of exploding ships and the flashing lights of battle, was now eerily silent. The Zalriths, once so confident in their superiority, were battered and broken, their mighty warships now nothing but drifting wreckage. They had retreated, abandoning their once proud fleet and fleeing from the planet in disarray. The Trelvans, against all odds, had emerged victorious, thanks to the unexpected arrival of the humans and their relentless warship, the Valor's Fury. On the ground, the Trelvans stood in stunned silence, watching as the remnants of the Zalrith forces disappeared into the distance. It was almost surreal. Their world, which had once been on the brink of destruction, was now free. The Trelvans, who had fought for so long with nothing but dwindling hope, now found themselves victorious. They had endured, and they had been saved by allies they never thought would come. The realization that they were no longer alone in the galaxy, the knowledge that humanity had answered their call, was overwhelming. Above them, the Valor's Fury hovered in the sky, its massive frame casting a shadow over the desolate landscape. Below, the warship's guns, which had once unleashed hell upon the Zalriths, were now silent. The battle was over, and the ship, having fulfilled its purpose, stood as a towering symbol of power and resilience. It was a silent reminder that the Trelvans had been saved not just by technology, but by something far more powerful, the unyielding determination and unbreakable will of the humans. As the Trelvan leaders gathered in the open plains, they looked up to see something that filled their hearts with a sense of awe. A figure was descending from the Valor's Fury, its descent steady and purposeful. The human commander, clad in battle armor that gleamed under the light of the planet's dying sun, touched down gently on the ground. His presence was commanding, yet there was an undeniable calmness to him. He stood tall and unwavering, as though the weight of the universe could not shake him. When he spoke, his voice was steady, yet firm, with a calm authority that seemed to echo through the silence that had fallen over the planet. "We don't leave people behind," he said simply, the words carrying a weight that left no room for doubt. Humanity never abandons its allies. The Trelvan leaders, who had spent years fighting for their survival, were left in stunned silence. They had hoped for help, prayed for it, but they had never truly expected it to come. Now, standing before them, was a force unlike any they had ever encountered. The human commander was not boasting of strength or victory. He was merely stating a truth that would resonate with the Trelvans for generations to come. The humans had come to their aid without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. It was a loyalty, a bond that could not be broken, and the Trelvans felt it deep in their hearts. The reputation of humanity, forged in the fires of this battle, would spread far and wide across the galaxy. The tale of the Valor's Fury and its unwavering commander would be told for centuries, a story of courage, honor, and an unbreakable will to protect those in need. The humans had arrived from the void, a distant and unknown force, and in doing so, they had forever changed the fate of Xalanthos. As the human commander turned to leave, his footsteps heavy on the cracked earth beneath him, the Trelvans felt a new hope stir within them. The war was over, yes, but more importantly, a new era was beginning, one where alliances could be forged, where distant stars might no longer be as cold and unreachable. Xalanthos would rebuild, stronger than ever. Before, with the knowledge that humanity was no longer a myth or a distant legend, they were real, and they had proven that they could be counted on. For the first time in years, hope returned to Xalanthos. The Trelvans knew that they had been saved by something greater than just the might of a warship. They had been saved by the spirit of humanity, the courage to fight for others, the refusal to abandon those in need, and the unbreakable bond forged through battle. And as they looked up at the Valor's fury, they knew that the galaxy would never forget the day. Humanity had come screaming from the void,